Rebellious niece sent to live with unknown relatives. What she finds in the basement changes everything. Hello, welcome, leave a like, subscribe, activate notifications, and enjoy this story. When Emily was sent to live with her distant relatives, it was supposed to be a fresh start. But from the moment she walked into that old, creaking house, she felt something was terribly wrong. The air was thick with secrets, the kind that make your skin crawl and your heart race. As Emily begins to uncover pieces of a past that were never meant to be found, she realizes that the truth might be far more terrifying than she ever imagined. What she discovers in that hidden basement changes everything she thought she knew about her family and about herself. This is not just a story of a rebellious teenager trying to fit in. It's a story about the lies we tell, the secrets we bury, and the lengths we go to protect what we love. But some truths can't stay hidden forever, and when they come to light, they can shatter everything. Prepare yourself for a journey where every turn reveals a new layer of deception, and where the final revelation will leave you questioning everything. The old Chevy rumbled to a stop in front of a weathered Victorian house on the outskirts of Syracuse, New York. 17-year-old Emily Matthews sat in the back seat, her dark eyes fixed on the imposing structure that loomed before her. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the overgrown lawn, giving the place an eerie, abandoned feel. "We're here," announced the social worker, her voice tinged with forced cheerfulness. Emily remained silent, clutching her backpack to her chest like a shield. As she stepped out of the car, the crisp autumn air bit at her cheeks. Fallen leaves crunched beneath her feet, their earthy scent mingling with the musty odor emanating from the house. Emily's stomach churned with a mixture of dread and resentment. Just 3 weeks ago, her world had shattered with her mother's sudden, mysterious death. Now here she was, being shipped off to live with relatives she barely knew. The front door creaked open, revealing a middle-aged couple, Aunt Martha and Uncle Robert. Their smiles seemed plastered on, not quite reaching their eyes. "Welcome, Emily," Aunt Martha said, her voice overly sweet. "We're so glad you're here." Emily bit back a sarcastic retort. Glad? Yeah, right. She doubted anyone was glad about this situation. After a brief, awkward exchange of pleasantries and paperwork with the social worker, Emily found herself alone with her new guardians. The silence that fell was suffocating. "Let me show you to your room," Aunt Martha offered, leading the way up a narrow staircase. The floorboards groaned under their feet, and Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the house itself was protesting her presence. The bedroom was small and sparsely furnished, with faded floral wallpaper that had seen better days. A musty smell permeated the air, as if the room had been sealed off for years. "We'll let you get settled," Uncle Robert said, hovering in the doorway. "Dinner's at 6. As soon as they left, Emily collapsed onto the bed, hot tears stinging her eyes. She allowed herself a moment of weakness, of raw grief for the life she'd lost. Her mother's face flashed in her mind, warm brown eyes, infectious laugh, the scent of her favorite perfume. Gone. All gone. Wiping her eyes furiously, Emily began to unpack. As she placed a framed photo of her mother on the nightstand, something caught her eye. There, tucked into the corner of the ornate mirror hanging on the wall, was an old photograph. With trembling fingers, Emily carefully removed it. Her breath caught in her throat. It was a picture of her mother as a young woman, standing between Aunt Martha and Uncle Robert. But what made Emily's heart race was the fourth figure in the photo, or rather, what remained of it. Where a man's face should have been, there was only a jagged tear, as if someone had violently ripped him from the image. Questions flooded Emily's mind. Who was this man? Why had he been removed so deliberately? And why did her mother look so different? There was a hardness in her eyes that Emily had never seen before. A chill ran down Emily's spine as she realized that this house held secrets, dark, painful secrets that someone had gone to great lengths to bury. The call for dinner interrupted her racing thoughts. As Emily made her way downstairs, the delicious aroma of pot roast filled the air, a stark contrast to the unease churning in her stomach. The dining room was dimly lit, dominated by a heavy oak table that seemed to have weathered countless family meals. Emily took her seat, acutely aware of the tension that hung in the air like a thick fog. Aunt Martha busied herself serving the food, her movements almost frantic. Uncle Robert cleared his throat, attempting small talk. "So, Emily," he began, his voice strained, "how are you finding your room?" Emily shrugged, pushing her food around the plate. "It's fine," she mumbled. An uncomfortable silence fell, broken only by the scraping of forks against plates. Emily's mind kept drifting back to the torn photograph upstairs. She debated whether to mention it, to demand answers about her mother's past, and the secrets this family seemed determined to keep. Just as she opened her mouth to speak, Aunt Martha dropped her glass, sending water and shards of crystal across the table. "Oh, clumsy me!" she exclaimed, her voice unnaturally high. As she scrambled to clean up the mess, Emily noticed her hands were shaking. "I'll get some towels from the basement," Uncle Robert offered, rising from his chair. "No!" Aunt Martha's outburst was so sudden and sharp that both Emily and Uncle Robert froze. "I mean," she continued, forcing a smile, "there's no need. I'll just grab some from the kitchen." Emily's eyes narrowed. The basement. What was down there that had Aunt Martha so rattled? As the adults fussed over the spilled water, Emily's gaze drifted to the heavy door at the far end of the dining room. It was slightly ajar, revealing a glimpse of descending stairs and impenetrable darkness beyond. A chill ran down her spine as she realized that whatever secrets this family was hiding, whatever truths about her mother's past lay buried, the answers were down there, in that basement. The rest of the meal passed in a blur of forced conversation and sidelong glances. As Emily helped clear the table, her mind raced with possibilities. She had to find a way into that basement, to uncover the truth her aunt and uncle seemed so desperate to hide. Later that night, as Emily lay in bed staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, she heard hushed voices drifting up from downstairs. Silently, she crept to the top of the stairs, straining to hear. "Can't keep this up forever," Uncle Robert was saying, his voice tense. "We have to," Aunt Martha hissed back. "For Emily's sake. For all our sakes." There was a pause, then the sound of a key turning in a lock. Emily's heart pounded. The basement. As she slipped back into her room, Emily's eyes fell on the torn photograph. Her mother's face stared back at her, a silent challenge. "I'll find out the truth, Mom," Emily whispered, determination replacing the grief in her heart. "I promise." Just then, a floorboard creaked in the hallway. Emily quickly turned off her light and dove under the covers, feigning sleep. As she lay there in the darkness, her mind whirled with questions and possibilities. Little did Emily know that her quest for answers would unravel a web of lies, betrayal, and long-buried secrets that would shake her world to its very foundation. The key to unlocking it all lay just beyond that basement door, and somehow she would find a way in. Emily woke with a start, her heart pounding. Sunlight streamed through the faded curtains, casting eerie shadows across her new room. For a moment, she struggled to remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back: her mother's death, the move, and the unsettling events of the previous night. Sitting up, her eyes fell on the torn photograph on her nightstand. The mystery of the basement gnawed at her, an itch she couldn't ignore. With newfound determination, Emily decided today was the day she'd uncover the truth. Downstairs, she found a note from Aunt Martha. "Gone to the farmer's market. Back by noon. Help yourself to breakfast." Perfect. She had the house to herself. Emily's hands trembled as she approached the basement door. To her surprise, it was unlocked. Taking a deep breath, she turned the knob and descended into the darkness. The stairs creaked ominously under her feet. The air grew thick and musty, heavy with the weight of long-buried secrets. At the bottom, Emily fumbled for a light switch, illuminating a cluttered space filled with forgotten relics of the past. Dust-covered furniture and stacks of cardboard boxes filled every corner. Emily's eyes darted around, searching for anything out of place. That's when she spotted it, an old metal lockbox, partially hidden behind a weathered armoire. With trembling fingers, she pried it open. Inside, she found a stack of yellowed envelopes, some over 30 years old. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she recognized her mother's handwriting. Settling onto an old trunk, Emily began to read. The first letter was dated June 15, 1990. My dearest Jay, I can't believe it's been a month since we last saw each other. Every day without you feels like an eternity. I know we agreed to keep our relationship a secret, but it's tearing me apart. Martha and Robert are getting suspicious. They keep pushing me to date that banker they introduced me to. If only they knew. Emily's mind reeled. Jay? Who was Jay? And why did her mother have to keep their relationship a secret? As she delved deeper into the letters, a story of forbidden love and heart-wrenching choices unfolded. Her mother had been involved with someone her family didn't approve of, someone whose name had been carefully erased from every letter. The final letter, dated just weeks before Emily was born, made her blood run cold. Jay, I'm so sorry. I can't do this anymore. They've threatened to take everything away, not just from me, but from you too. I have to protect our baby. Please forgive me. I'll always love you. Goodbye forever. Sarah. Tears streamed down Emily's face as the weight of the revelation crashed over her. Her entire life had been built on a foundation of lies and secrets. The father she'd been told died before she was born. Was he still out there somewhere? Lost in thought, Emily almost missed the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Panic seized her as she realized Aunt Martha was home early. Hastily shoving the letters back into the box, she scrambled up the stairs, her mind whirling with questions and a growing sense of betrayal. As she emerged from the basement, she came face to face with Aunt Martha, whose eyes widened in shock and then narrowed with suspicion. Emily? What were you doing down there? Emily's mind raced, searching for an excuse. I was just looking for some old photo albums. I wanted to see pictures of Mom when she was younger. Aunt Martha's face softened slightly, but there was still an edge to her voice. Oh, sweetie, next time just ask. The basement isn't a safe place to explore on your own. Emily nodded, forcing a smile even as her insides churned with a mix of anger and confusion. As she helped her aunt unpack groceries, her mind kept drifting back to the letters. Who was Jay? Why had her mother been forced to give him up? And most importantly, what other secrets were her aunt and uncle hiding? That night, as Emily lay in bed, she made a silent vow. She would uncover the truth no matter the cost. Little did she know that her quest for answers would unravel a web of lies that stretched back decades, forever changing her understanding of family, love, and sacrifice. As she drifted off to sleep, the faces from the torn photograph seemed to watch her from the shadows. Tomorrow, she decided she would start digging deeper. The truth was out there, hidden in the dark corners of this house and the even darker corners of her family's past. And Emily was determined to bring it all to light. The next morning, Emily woke with a sense of purpose that cut through her grief like a knife. The weight of yesterday's discoveries pressed heavily on her mind, but it also fueled her determination. As she made her way downstairs, she steeled herself for the task ahead, carefully probing her aunt and uncle for information without revealing what she knew. The kitchen was filled with the aroma of coffee and pancakes. Aunt Martha stood at the stove, her back to Emily, humming softly to herself. The normalcy of the scene felt almost obscene in light of the secrets Emily now knew were lurking beneath the surface. "Good morning," Emily said, forcing a neutral tone. Aunt Martha startled, nearly dropping the spatula. "Oh, Emily dear, you startled me. Did you sleep well?" Emily nodded, taking a seat at the kitchen island. "Fine, thanks. Those old photo albums got me thinking, though. I'd love to hear more about Mom when she was younger. What was she like?" A flicker of something, was it fear, passed over Aunt Martha's face before she composed herself. Oh, Sarah was spirited, always full of life and dreams. Dreams? Emily pressed. What kind of dreams? Aunt Martha's movements became more agitated as she flipped pancakes with unnecessary force. "Oh, travel, adventure. The usual things young people dream about. Emily's eyes narrowed. Did she ever talk about falling in love? Having a family? The spatula clattered to the floor. Aunt Martha bent to retrieve it, her face hidden. When she straightened, her smile was too bright, too forced. Why all these questions, dear? It's not healthy to dwell on the past, you know. Before Emily could respond, Uncle Robert entered the kitchen, his presence immediately filling the room with tension. Good morning, ladies. What's all this about the past? Nothing, Aunt Martha said quickly. Emily was just curious about her mother's younger days. Uncle Robert's gaze locked onto Emily, his eyes searching. Is that so? Well, there's not much to tell, really. Your mother was complicated. Emily felt a surge of anger at his dismissive tone. Complicated how? That's enough questions for now, Aunt Martha interjected, setting a plate of pancakes in front of Emily with trembling hands. Eat up, dear. Robert, don't you have that meeting this morning? The abrupt change of subject wasn't lost on Emily. As she picked at her breakfast, she observed her aunt and uncle's interactions with new eyes. The tense glances, the way they seemed to communicate without words. It all pointed to a shared burden, a secret they were desperate to keep. After breakfast, Emily retreated to her room, her mind churning. She pulled out the photo she'd found on her first night, the one with her mother and the mysterious torn-out figure. Studying it closely, she noticed something she'd missed before. A faint inscription on the back, nearly rubbed away with time. Squinting, she could just make out the words, Sarah, Robert, Martha, and J. Summer 89, J. The same initial from the letters. Emily's heart raced. This was the missing piece, the key to unlocking the whole mystery. A knock at her door made her jump. She quickly hid the photo as Uncle Robert entered. Emily, he said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. I know this is a difficult time for you. Your aunt and we want you to feel at home here. Emily met his gaze, searching for any hint of sincerity. Then why do I feel like everyone's hiding something from me? Robert's face paled. What do you mean? Mom never talked about her past, Emily said, choosing her words carefully. And now, neither will you or Aunt Martha. Why? What are you afraid I'll find out? For a moment, something like anguish flashed across Robert's features. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, replaced by a mask of stern authority. The past is complicated, Emily. Sometimes it's better left alone, for everyone's sake. His tone left no room for argument. As he left, closing the door behind him, Emily felt a mix of frustration and vindication. Their reactions only confirmed her suspicions. There was far more to the story than anyone was willing to admit. That night, unable to sleep, Emily crept downstairs for a glass of water. As she passed the living room, she overheard hushed voices. Can't keep this up forever, Uncle Robert was saying, his voice strained. We have to, Aunt Martha replied fiercely. If she ever found out the truth. Found out what? Emily thought, her heart pounding. She leaned closer, straining to hear more. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked beneath her feet. The voices inside fell silent. Emily barely had time to dash back upstairs before the living room door opened. Safe in her room, Emily's mind raced. Whatever secret her aunt and uncle were keeping, it was big enough to make them live in constant fear of discovery. And somehow, it all tied back to her mother and the mysterious J. As she lay in bed, staring at the shadowy ceiling, Emily made a silent vow. She would uncover the truth no matter the cost. Little did she know that her quest for answers would unravel a web of lies, betrayal, and long-buried secrets that would shake her world to its very foundation. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with danger, but Emily was ready. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt a spark of purpose. Whatever truths lay hidden in the dark corners of her family's past, she would bring them to light. And nothing, not her aunt and uncle's evasions, not the weight of decades-old secrets, would stand in her way. Days passed, and Emily's determination only grew stronger. She'd become hyper-aware of every glance, every whispered conversation between her aunt and uncle. The house itself seemed to creak with the weight of unspoken truths. One particularly gloomy afternoon, Emily found herself alone in the house again. Aunt Martha had gone to her book club, and Uncle Robert was at work. It was the perfect opportunity to dig deeper. She started in the attic, sifting through dusty boxes and old trunks. Hours passed with little to show for her efforts until she stumbled upon an old leather-bound journal tucked away in a weathered suitcase. Her heart raced as she recognized her mother's handwriting. The journal was dated 1989, the same year as the torn photograph. With trembling hands, Emily began to read. July 15, 1989, I met him today. J. I've never believed in love at first sight, but the moment our eyes met, something inside me shifted. It's like I've been sleepwalking my whole life, and he woke me up. Emily's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the beginning of the story that had shaped her entire existence. As she delved deeper into the journal, a picture emerged of a passionate, forbidden romance. Her mother, Sarah, had fallen deeply in love with a man named James. But there was a problem. James came from the wrong side of the tracks. As Sarah put it, the Matthews family, it seemed, had certain expectations. August 30th, 1989, Robert and Martha found out about James. The fight was horrific. They called him trash, said he'd ruin my life. But they don't understand. James is everything to me. We're going to run away together, start a new life. Emily's mind reeled. Robert and Martha, her aunt and uncle, had actively tried to keep her parents apart. But why? What was so threatening about James? The answer came a few pages later, and it hit Emily like a punch to the gut. September 15th, 1989, I can't believe it. James he's Robert and Martha's half-brother. A child from an affair their father had years ago. They've known all along, and they've been desperate to keep it quiet. The scandal would ruin the family name, they said. But I don't care about any of that. I love James, and I'm going to be with him, no matter what. Emily gasped, the journal nearly slipping from her hands. Her father wasn't just some man her family disapproved of. He was their secret brother. The implications were staggering. Just then, she heard the front door open. Aunt Martha was home early. In a panic, Emily shoved the journal into her backpack and rushed to replace everything else as she'd found it. She managed to slip out of the attic just as Aunt Martha called up the stairs. Emily, are you home? Yeah, just doing some reading in my room, Emily called back, her voice shaky. That night, sleep eluded her. The revelations from the journal played over and over in her mind. Her father, James, was alive. He was her uncle's half-brother, and her mother had been forced to give him up. But why? What had happened after that last journal entry? And most importantly, where was James now? The next morning, Emily steeled herself for a confrontation. She couldn't keep pretending anymore. As she entered the kitchen, where Aunt Martha was preparing breakfast, she took a deep breath. I know about James, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The effect was immediate. Aunt Martha's face drained of color, and the mug she was holding crashed to the floor. What did you say? Martha stammered, her eyes wide with fear. James, my father, your half-brother. Emily's words hung in the air like a challenge. For a long moment, Martha said nothing. Then, to Emily's shock, she burst into tears. Oh, Emily, she sobbed. You have no idea. The things we've done. To protect you. Just then, Uncle Robert entered the kitchen, taking in the scene with alarm. What's going on here? She knows Robert, Martha choked out. About James. Robert's face hardened. He turned to Emily, his voice low and dangerous. Where did you hear that name? Emily stood her ground. I found Mom's old journal. I know everything, or at least I thought I did. But there's more, isn't there? What aren't you telling me? The tension in the room was palpable. Robert and Martha exchanged a long look, seeming to have a silent conversation. Finally, Robert sighed heavily. Sit down, Emily, he said, his voice weary. It's time you learned the whole truth. But I warn you, once you hear this, There's no going back. Are you sure you're ready? Emily's heart pounded in her chest. This was it, the moment she'd been waiting for. Whatever secrets lay buried in her family's past, she was about to uncover them all. With a mixture of fear and determination, she nodded. I'm ready. As she sat at the kitchen table, bracing herself for the revelations to come, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change forever. The truth, it seemed, was finally ready to emerge from the shadows. Little did she know just how deep those shadows ran, or the price she would have to pay to bring everything to light. Emily sat at the kitchen table, her heart pounding as she waited for her aunt and uncle to speak. The air felt thick with tension, years of secrets on the verge of spilling out. Uncle Robert paced the room, running a hand through his graying hair. Where do we even begin? He muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Aunt Martha, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, reached out and took Emily's hand. Sweetheart, you have to understand. Everything we did to protect you and your mother. Emily pulled her hand away, her voice hard. Protect us from what? The truth. Robert stopped pacing and fixed Emily with a stern gaze. From scandal, from ruin, from a man who would have destroyed everything. You mean my father? Emily said, her tone challenging. Robert's face darkened. James was complicated. Yes, he was our half-brother, a secret our father had managed to keep hidden for years. But when James found out about his true parentage, he became obsessed with claiming what he saw as his birthright. What do you mean? Emily asked, confusion creeping into her voice. Martha spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. The family fortune, dear. Your grandfather, he built an empire. James wanted his share. Emily's mind reeled. She'd always known her mother came from money, but she'd never realized the extent of it. So what? He was entitled to it, wasn't he? If he was family? Robert slammed his hand on the table, making both Emily and Martha jump. He wasn't family. He was a con artist, a manipulator. He seduced your mother to get to the money. That's not true, Emily protested, thinking of the love she'd read about in her mother's journal. They were in love. Oh, Emily, Martha said sadly, love can blind us to the truth. James, he had a history, other women, other families he'd conned. We tried to warn Sarah, but she wouldn't listen. Emily's head spun. This couldn't be right. The passionate love story she'd read about. Had it all been a lie? If he was so terrible, Emily said slowly, why did Mom stay with him? Why did she have me? Robert and Martha exchanged a look that sent chills down Emily's spine. Your mother, Robert began, then faltered. Sarah didn't exactly stay with him willingly. The implication hung in the air, heavy and horrifying. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. What are you saying? Martha reached for Emily's hand again, and this time, Emily didn't pull away. James became unstable when he realized he couldn't get the money. He threatened your mother, threatened all of us. And then, he took her, Robert finished, his voice hard, kept her captive for months. By the time we found her, she was pregnant with you. Emily felt like she might be sick. The room seemed to spin around her. This couldn't be true. Couldn't. No, she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. You're lying. The journal was written before James showed his true colors, Martha said gently. Your mother, she wanted to remember the good times, to believe that there had been love once. For your sake. Emily's mind raced, trying to reconcile this new information with everything she thought she knew. But what happened to him? To James? Robert's expression turned grim. He's in prison. Has been for the past 17 years. Life sentence. For what he did to Mom? Emily asked, her voice small. That, Robert said. And for what he tried to do to you? Emily's head snapped up. What? Martha squeezed her hand. When you were just a baby, James escaped custody. He came for you, Emily. He was going to take you, use you to blackmail us. If your mother hadn't, she trailed off, choking back a sob. Robert finished for her, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah protected you. She confronted James. There was a struggle. He fell, or she pushed him, we're not sure. Down the stairs of our old house in Albany. Emily felt like she couldn't breathe. Is that why we moved? Why Mom never talked about the past? Her aunt and uncle nodded solemnly. We had to start over, Martha explained. New town, new identities. To keep you safe. Emily's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Shock, anger, grief, and a deep, aching sense of loss for the mother she realized she'd never truly known. All these years, she said, her voice barely audible. You've been carrying this secret, protecting me. Robert nodded, his stern facade finally cracking to reveal the weight of years of guilt and worry. We made a promise to Sarah, to keep you safe, to give you a normal life. But now, Martha added, you're old enough to know the truth, to understand why things are the way they are. Emily sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything she'd learned. Her entire world had just been turned upside down. The father she'd imagined a tragic figure, a lost love, was instead a monster. And her mother, her brave, beautiful mother, had sacrificed everything to protect her. As the full impact of the revelation washed over her, Emily began to sob deep, racking cries that shook her entire body. Martha moved to embrace her, and for once, Emily didn't resist. She let herself be held, mourning for the life she thought she'd had, and for the mother she'd lost all over again. But even as she cried, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that something still didn't add up. The passion in her mother's journal, the torn photograph, the hushed conversations she'd overheard, there were still pieces missing from this puzzle. As her tears subsided, Emily made a silent vow. She would honor her mother's sacrifice by uncovering the whole truth, no matter where it led her, no matter what it cost. Little did she know, the greatest revelations and the greatest dangers still lay ahead. The days following the shocking revelation passed in a haze for Emily. She alternated between bouts of intense grief and periods of numb disbelief. The world around her seemed muffled, as if she were viewing it through a thick fog. But as the initial shock began to wear off, Emily's natural skepticism reasserted itself. Something about her aunt and uncle's story didn't sit right with her. The passionate love she'd read about in her mother's journal didn't align with the picture they'd painted of James as a manipulative monster. One evening, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a plan began to form in her mind. She needed more information, and she knew just where to start. The next morning, Emily approached her aunt in the kitchen. I want to visit Mom's grave, she announced. Aunt Martha nearly dropped the plate she was drying. Oh, sweetie, I don't know if that's a good idea right now. Please, Emily insisted, forcing her voice to crack slightly. I need this to process everything. After a moment's hesitation, Martha nodded. All right, we'll go this afternoon. As they drove to the cemetery, Emily's mind raced. This was her chance to gather more clues, to see if there was anything her aunt and uncle had overlooked. At the gravesite, Emily knelt before her mother's headstone, genuinely overcome with emotion. But as Aunt Martha stepped away to give her some privacy, Emily quickly scanned the surrounding area. Her eyes landed on a small, weather-worn stone a few rows over. The name was faded, but she could just make it out. James Matthews. Her heart pounding, Emily realized her hunch had been correct. They'd buried her father near her mother, despite everything they'd told her about him being a monster. Why? Back at the house, Emily retreated to her room, her mind whirling with possibilities. She needed to find out more about James, about what really happened all those years ago. Late that night, after her aunt and uncle had gone to bed, Emily crept downstairs to Uncle Robert's study. She knew he kept important documents in a locked drawer of his desk. With trembling hands, she used a bobby pin to pick the lock, a skill she'd learned during her rebellious phase back home. Inside, she found a stack of old newspaper clippings. Her breath caught as she read the headlines. Local man arrested in kidnapping case, Matthews family scandal, illegitimate son claims inheritance, tragic accident or calculated murder. Sarah Matthews acquitted. Emily's head spun. Murder? Acquitted? This didn't match the story her aunt and uncle had told her at all. As she dug deeper, she uncovered court transcripts, police reports, and letters from her mother to James, dated long after he'd supposedly been imprisoned. The truth began to take shape, and it was far more complex and heartbreaking than she could have imagined. James hadn't kidnapped her mother. They'd run away together. The kidnapping story had been concocted by her aunt and uncle to protect the family name. And the accident that had supposedly put James in prison? It had been her mother who'd fallen down the stairs, not James. He'd been falsely accused and convicted to keep him away from the family fortune. Tears streamed down Emily's face as she realized the extent of the lies she'd been told. Her mother and father had been kept apart by greed and manipulation. And she, Emily, had been the unwitting pawn in this cruel game. Just then, the study light flicked on. Emily looked up to see Uncle Robert standing in the doorway, his face a mask of fury. "What do you think you're doing?" he thundered. Emily stood, clutching the documents to her chest. "Finding out the truth," she shot back. "How could you lie to me like this? All these years." Robert's face paled. "You don't understand. We did what we had to do to protect the family name, to protect you." "Protect me?" Emily's voice rose. "You kept me from my father. You lied about everything." As they argued, Aunt Martha appeared in the doorway, her face stricken. "Robert, what's going on?" "She knows," Robert said grimly. "She found the files." Martha's hands flew to her mouth. "Oh, Emily, we never meant for you to find out like this." Emily's anger boiled over. "How did you mean for me to find out? Were you ever going to tell me the truth?" The confrontation escalated, with accusations and justifications flying back and forth. Emily learned that her mother had died not from an illness as she'd been told, but from complications related to her old injuries sustained in the fall that James had been blamed for. As the full weight of the deception crashed down on her, Emily felt something inside her break. Without another word, she pushed past her aunt and uncle and ran up to her room, locking the door behind her. Collapsing onto her bed, Emily sobbed uncontrollably. Her entire life had been built on lies. The parents she'd imagined, the tragic love story, the heroic sacrifice, none of it was real. Instead, she was the product of a family torn apart by greed, manipulation, and deceit. As the first light of dawn crept through her window, Emily made a decision. She couldn't stay in this house of lies any longer. She needed to find her father, to hear his side of the story, to understand the truth about where she came from. Wiping her eyes, she began to pack a bag. She had no idea where James might be after all these years, but she was determined to find him. Whatever it took, she would uncover the whole truth and make sense of the tangled web of secrets that had shaped her life. Little did Emily know that her quest for answers would lead her down a path far more dangerous and shocking than she could have ever imagined. The final pieces of the puzzle were waiting to be discovered, and with them, a truth that would change everything she thought she knew about family, love, and sacrifice. The pre-dawn light cast long shadows as Emily crept out of the house, her backpack slung over her shoulder. Her heart raced with a mixture of fear and determination. She had no real plan, just a burning need to find her father and uncover the truth. As she reached the end of the driveway, headlights illuminated the street. Emily froze, thinking her aunt and uncle had discovered her absence. But the car that pulled up was unfamiliar, a beat-up old Chevy with rust spots on the fenders. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was older, with graying hair and a weathered face, but there was something hauntingly familiar about his eyes. "Emily?" he called softly. She took a step back, her voice barely a whisper. "Who are you?" The man's eyes filled with tears. "I'm James. I'm your father." Emily's world tilted on its axis. After everything she'd learned, everything she'd been through, here he was, the missing piece of her puzzle, standing right in front of her. How did you find me?" she managed to ask. James smiled sadly. I've always known where you were. I've been watching over you from afar, waiting for the right moment to make contact. Emily's mind reeled. But they said you were in prison, that you were dangerous. James shook his head. It's a long story, sweetheart. One I'd like to tell you, if you're willing to listen. But we should go before your aunt and uncle wake up. Every instinct told Emily to be cautious, but something in her father's eyes, a mixture of pain, love, and hope, made her decision for her. She nodded and climbed into the passenger seat. As they drove through the quiet streets, James began to speak. His story confirmed much of what Emily had pieced together from the documents she'd found. But there was so much more. Your mother and we were in love truly and deeply, James said, his voice thick with emotion. But Robert and Martha couldn't accept it. They saw me as a threat to their comfortable life, to their inheritance. He went on to explain how they had fabricated evidence against him, using their connections to have him falsely imprisoned. But Sarah, Emily's mother, had never stopped fighting for him. She visited me in secret, brought me letters and photos of you growing up, James said. We were planning to clear my name, to be a family again. But then, his voice trailed off, and Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Then what? James gripped the steering wheel tightly. Your mother discovered something big, a secret that would have brought down not just Robert and Martha, but half the powerful families in the state. She was going to expose it all to finally set things right. Emily's breath caught in her throat. What happened? They got to her first, James said, his voice barely above a whisper. The accident that injured her. It wasn't an accident at all. And when she finally succumbed to those injuries years later, it wasn't just bad luck. They silenced her, Emily, to keep their secrets buried. Tears streamed down Emily's face as the full, horrifying truth sank in. Her mother hadn't just been caught in a family squabble. She'd been murdered to protect a conspiracy that went far beyond anything Emily had imagined. But why tell me now? Emily asked, wiping her eyes. Why wait all these years? James pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned to face his daughter. Because you're old enough now to understand, to make your own choices. And because I finally have the evidence we need to bring it all to light. To get justice for your mother, and for all the others they've hurt. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a USB drive. Everything's on here. Financial records, emails, recorded conversations. Enough to blow the whole thing wide open. Emily stared at the small device, feeling the weight of its importance. What do we do now? James's expression hardened with determination. We take it to the authorities. But we have to be careful. The people involved, they're powerful, Emily. Dangerous. Once we do this, there's no going back. For a moment, Emily hesitated. She thought of the life she'd known, of the aunt and uncle who, despite their lies, had raised her. But then she thought of her mother, brave, loving Sarah, who had sacrificed everything for the truth. With a deep breath, Emily nodded. Let's do it. For Mom. James smiled, a mixture of pride and sadness in his eyes. For Sarah, he agreed. As they pulled back onto the road, heading towards an uncertain future, Emily felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. The truth, the whole unvarnished truth, was finally within her grasp. But little did she know that the most shocking revelations were yet to come. The conspiracy ran deeper than even James realized, and the danger they faced was far greater than either of them could have imagined. As the sun rose on a new day, Emily and James drove towards their destiny, unaware that their actions were about to set in motion a chain of events that would shake the foundations of power and change their lives forever. The final chapter of their story was about to unfold, and nothing would ever be the same again. The sleek government building loomed before them, its glass facade reflecting the early morning sunlight. Emily's heart pounded as she and James approached the entrance, the USB drive feeling like it weighed a ton in her pocket. Are you ready? James asked, his voice a mixture of determination and apprehension. Emily nodded, squaring her shoulders. Let's finish this. As they stepped inside, A flurry of activity erupted around them. Men in suits appeared seemingly out of nowhere, surrounding them with stern expressions. "James Matthews?" one of them asked, flashing a badge. "We've been expecting you." Emily's breath caught in her throat. How did they know? Before either of them could react, they were ushered into a private room. A distinguished-looking woman in her 50s sat behind a desk, her piercing gaze fixed on James. "Mr. Matthews," she said, her voice crisp, "I'm Special Agent Lawson. We've been tracking your movements for some time now." James tensed beside Emily. "Then you know why we're here." Agent Lawson nodded. "We do. And I must say, the evidence you've gathered is impressive, but incomplete." She pressed a button, and a screen on the wall flickered to life. What Emily saw made her gasp. Images and documents flashed across the screen, evidence of a conspiracy far larger than anything they had imagined. It implicated not just Emily's aunt and uncle, but judges, politicians, business leaders, a web of corruption that stretched across the entire state. "We've been building this case for years," Agent Lawson explained. "Your mother's discovery was just the tip of the iceberg. When she died, we feared the truth might die with her. But then we learned about you, James, about the evidence you were gathering." James looked stunned. "You've been watching me all this time? Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Agent Lawson's expression softened slightly. "We needed to be sure, and we needed to keep you safe. The people involved, they wouldn't have hesitated to silence you, just as they did Sarah." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. All this time, they'd been pawns in a game much larger than they'd realized. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Agent Lawson stood, her posture resolute. "Now we bring them all down. Your evidence, combined with what we've gathered, is enough to prosecute dozens of high-level conspirators. But I warn you, it won't be easy. These people will fight back with everything they have." James reached out and took Emily's hand, squeezing it gently. "We're ready," he said, "for Sarah, for justice." The next few weeks passed in a blur of depositions, court appearances, and media frenzy. Emily watched in awe as the carefully constructed facade of power crumbled, taking down pillars of the community she'd once respected. Her aunt and uncle were among the first to be arrested. Seeing them led away in handcuffs, Emily felt a complex mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a small, unexpected pang of loss for the family life she'd once known, false though it had been. As the dust began to settle, Emily found herself sitting with James in a quiet park, away from the chaos of the ongoing investigations. "I still can't believe it's all real," she said, watching a group of children play nearby. "Everything I thought I knew about my life, about our family." James nodded, his eyes distant. "I know, there's a lot to process. But your mother, she would be so proud of you, Emily. You have her courage, her determination to see justice done." Emily felt tears prick at her eyes. I wish I could have known her, the real her." James pulled out a worn envelope from his jacket. "She left this for you, asked me to give it to you when the time was right. I think now is that time." With trembling hands, Emily opened the letter and began to read. "My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, then the truth has finally come to light. I'm so sorry for all the pain and confusion you must have endured. Please know that everything your father and I did, we did out of love for you. The world can be a dark place, full of people who will do anything to hold on to power and wealth. But it's also full of beauty, of love, and of brave souls willing to stand up for what's right. You are my greatest joy, my darling girl. And I know that whatever path you choose in life, you will walk it with courage and integrity. Never stop seeking the truth, but also never let the darkness of the world dim the light in your heart. I love you always and forever. Mom." Emily clutched the letter to her chest, tears flowing freely now. She felt James's arm around her shoulders, offering silent support. As they sat there, watching the sun begin to set, Emily realized that while the journey had been painful, it had led her to this moment, to the truth, to her father, and to a deeper understanding of the mother she'd lost. The road ahead would not be easy. There were still battles to be fought, truths to be revealed. But for the first time in her life, Emily felt truly grounded in who she was and where she came from. She turned to James, a small smile on her tear-stained face. "Thank you," she said simply, "for never giving up, for fighting for the truth." James pulled her into a tight embrace. "Thank you for being brave enough to seek it out." As they walked out of the park together, Emily felt a sense of peace wash over her. The past could not be changed, but the future, a future built on truth and justice, was theirs to shape. And whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she would face them with the strength and courage of both her parents guiding her way. Thank you very much for listening to this story. Comment below what you thought of the ending and from which city you're listening to us. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, click on the next story that's appearing on your screen now. Leave your like and subscribe to our channel so we can build a huge community that shares inspiring stories together. See you soon.